Hello, I'm Horace Douty in Lexington, Virginia, author of 2 volumes entitled History Lessons from a Country Church. These books, if you are interested, are available off of Amazon, also in the Bookery of Lexington and Downtown Books of Lexington, Virginia. Today, I want to talk about Stonewall Jackson. I am in what used to be called the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery in Lexington. It has been renamed, and you have a famous sculpture of Stonewall Jackson in the background. For some heroes, success and fame seems to come upon them as a gentle gift from heaven, because from early childhood they do things correctly on the first attempt with no apparent training. Jackson was not so fortunate. Although no man in Rockbridge County was more determined to succeed than he, Jackson's eventual success came only after the expenditure of enormous effort. Born in 1824, orphaned by age 7, Thomas Jackson was shuffled from home to home as he grew up among his relatives. At age 18, he entered West Point Academy. What sustained him? The childhood memory of his mother's prayers. Her young life had ended abruptly, but her influence endured throughout the entire lifetime of her famous son. Jackson came to Lexington in 1851 as an instructor at Virginia Military Institute. His outstanding service as a soldier in Mexico, plus his phenomenal mental capacity, had won recognition among American military leaders. Rockbridge delighted Jackson. He wrote glowingly of the unsurpassed natural scenery. He was a professional soldier who longed to put down roots. He earnestly desired a family situation. In Lexington, he would finally have that blessing that had been not denied him in childhood. He would have a home. Jackson married Eleanor Junkin in 1853 and moved into her home, the large President's House on the campus of Washington College. After the distinguished Junkin family adjusted to Jackson's numerous eccentricities, they learned to love him. How was he different? The short answer is every way. He marched to his own drummer. Jackson followed a schedule that was fixed in his mind, and nothing would cause him to deviate. In the midst of the most exciting evening conversation at the Junkin fireside, Jackson would abruptly rise and go to his room at the first stroke of the hour, which his brain told him was his time to study. The Junkins and their guests would be left looking at each other in wonderment. Eleanor's older sister, Margaret, lived there. She wrote vivid accounts of Jackson's impact on Lexington. Now be aware, Margaret later became Mrs. J.T.L. Preston, but not before she had developed an intense relationship with Stonewall after Eleanor's untimely death. And Margaret Junkin's writing won for her the title Poet Laureate of the South. Cadets and students there at VMI referred to Jackson as Tom Fool. Only after the Major proved to be a stone wall in combat did the snickering end. He may have had his peculiarities, but in war, Jackson had no match. Throughout his life, he was a health fanatic. He sucked lemons constantly, believing that they added strength and vigor to the body. He refused coffee and tea, not because he found them distasteful, but because he found them enjoyable. The same was true for alcohol and tobacco. On hot summer nights, it was Jackson's practice to soak his sheepskin sleep shirt not sheepskin, but sleep shirt, in cold water, put it on wet, and go to bed, to the dismay of his physician who wrote about it. And when he walked across the college campus, he kept one hand in the air above his head to promote good blood circulation to his brain. And it made him look like something of an idiot, perhaps, but it must have worked, because some of his detractors could have benefited from Jackson's unusual notions had they been willing to experiment. The power of Jackson's intellect was never in doubt. He memorized his class lectures, expounding on difficult mathematical analyses. He flooded the classroom with details about dimensions and notions and motions and formulae, all of it clear in his own brain, but he made the mistake of assuming that the students' minds were blessed with similar capabilities. Most were not. Jackson was not a popular teacher. His immense power of concentration turned him into a very effective warrior, and as he rode through any countryside, he could memorize and record every detail, every mountain, every valley, every stream, and he ignored in battle enemy bullets and bombs and blessings. But because his brain was always engaged in the next maneuver. After his death, astonished Lexingtonians watched Northern soldiers flock to this grave in honor of their fallen enemy. His tactics have been copied worldwide. Stonewall Jackson was successful as a soldier. Most of us have never been told of his other achievements. One notable example is the Sunday school that he founded and operated for Lexington slaves. Major Jackson memorized the Presbyterian Catechism, and he required those slaves to do the same. It must have been an unpleasant chore for them, but they eagerly came, and they quickly learned arrive on time, because Jackson locked the door at the stroke of the hour, and no latecomers were ever admitted. At the time, it was the slaves' only opportunity for education. They showed great affection for their stern teacher and called Jackson the black man's friend. Several of the students achieved high positions. One of them was elected president of Morgan State University in Baltimore. Another served for many years as pastor of the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church in Roanoke, and his name is still familiar in Lexington, Dr. Lilburn Downing. Jackson began every day with a period of prayer. Nothing was allowed to interrupt that half hour. Then he took a brisk walk, which was followed by family prayers. Everybody in the household was required to be present, even the guests and the servants. Public prayer was a challenge, though. Reverend White, right down here in the church, asked Jackson to lead in prayer. The disaster was long remembered by all who were there. That brilliant brain failed. Jackson stood up, was able to stammer only a few halting words, then choked in silence, and finally sat down, and everybody was embarrassed. The saintly pastor stepped forward and relieved tensions by dismissing the meeting. Word spread throughout the town. Jackson, who demanded perfection from those about him, had performed miserably. They, people, were delighted with such a morsel of gossip, and to this day, the event is recounted and spoken of with a smile. But watch, that great soldier taught himself. By extreme effort of mind and will, he became a forceful public speaker. People would travel for miles to hear his beautiful and moving prayers. Soldiers on the battlefield became Christian through the power of Jackson's clearly enunciated prayers. And black people congregated at his house in Lexington so that they could overhear the family prayers of an evening. Few admirers realized that this devout church deacon was also successful in the business world. Jackson was driven to overcome the hardship that he endured as a child by careful investment of his modest salary. he became a well-to-do citizen of Lexington. He and his second wife, Mary Ann Morrison, bought what is now known the Jackson House, recognized as a tourist destination, and it was once a hospital. He bought a small farm on the east edge of town where he produced wheat and corn and cabbage and kept a cow. He owned as many as 9 slaves, 6 of whom came with his marriage to Mariana. Jackson owned 1/3 of the Lexington tannery, a strong downtown industry. Financial leaders took note. They elected him to the board of the Lexington Savings Institution, as well as the mortgage lending group called the Lexington Building Fund Association. Jackson was never called Tom Fool by the bankers. He joined that prestigious Franklin Society, and after a dismal beginning, he worked his way forward from painful, dull speeches to precise and polished presentations. Elected as one of the 12 original members of the Rockbridge Bible Society, and became a life member of the American Bible Society. We're talking about Stonewall Jackson. And we see in this man a bashful orphan who, by intense persistence, realized his ambitions. He had a favorite saying that guided him and can do the same for you. That often used Jackson quote is chiseled into the wall of the Virginia Military Institute, quote, "You may do whatever you resolve to do." Thank you, Stonewall Jackson.